The Ballidorse Wrathweavers were introduced in Lightfall, although likely overshadowed by the Strand release at the time. But today I'm going to put together a Stasis Warlock build with the Ballidorse Wrathweavers so you can unleash Winter's Wrath on your enemies, freezing, slowing and putting them permanently on ice in Destiny 2. But this build is all about maximising your super, causing as much damage as possible with it, and getting your super back as often as you can. It also has support elements as well, giving your teammates an overshield and buffing their stasis weapons, so a little bit of coordination around the stasis subclass can be helpful. Okay, next up let's dive into the build, and first of all let's have a look at the stasis subclass setup. So for my super I'm using Winter's Wrath, for my grenade I'm using a Cold Snap grenade, and my melee Penumbral Blast, and my class ability I'm using a Healing Rift. For my aspects, I'm using Ice Flare Bolt, so shattering a frozen target spawns Seekers that track and freeze other nearby targets, and also Frost Pulse. Casting your Rift generates a shockwave that freezes nearby combatants. For my fragments, I'm using Whisper of Chains, so while you're near frozen targets or friendly stasis crystals, you take reduced damage from targets. I'm using Whisper of Shards, so shattering a stasis crystal temporarily boosts your grenade recharge rate. Shattering additional stasis crystals increases the duration of this benefit. Then I'm using Whisper of Bonds, so defeating frozen targets grants you super energy. And then Whisper of Fissures, so increase the damage and size of the burst of stasis when you destroy a crystal or defeat a frozen target. Next up for the exotic armor, I'm using the Ballidorse Wrathweavers. So the perk here is Hearts of Ice, so your Winter's Wrath shockwave deals increased shatter damage, and allies in range of your shockwave gain an overshield and increased damage with stasis weapons. So during Winter's Wrath super, the shockwave deals 100% increased shatter damage. Allies within range of the shockwave, and that is about 30 meters, they are granted the following for 15 seconds. So 50 HP stasis shard overshield and 15% increased stasis weapon damage, and in PvP it is 5%. Well, if you want to get these gloves, you can get them from the Legend or Master Lost sectors on Arms Day, or from the Vex Incursion public event on Neomuna. Next up, let's have a look at the weapons for the build. So in my kinetic slot, I'm using the Wicked Implement. This one is an exotic scout rifle from Season of the Deep, and it has a couple of exotic perks. So Creeping Attrition, rapidly landing precision hits cause the target to become slowed, so that's good for your stasis build. And Tithing Harvest, destroyed stasis crystals or precision final blows while Creeping Attrition is active create a stasis shard that returns to you, and collecting stasis shards refills the magazine. You can get this one from the exotic mission in the Deep Dive activity. In the energy slot I'm using the Pre-Astyanax, and the Pre-Astyanax 4 is a legendary energy combat bow with a precision frame. It's a compound bow, meaning longer draw time and optimized for damage. I'm using double primary here, so a scout rifle in my primary slot, or the kinetic slot, and a bow in my energy slot, and this is good for Nightfalls this season, especially this week when this guide is released. Although you can mix and match any weapons that you want, I would just recommend in your kinetic slot using a stasis damage output weapon, and also in the power slot too. Well, going back to the Pre-Astyanax, it's a legendary energy combat bow with a precision frame. It's a compound bow, meaning it's optimized for damage. Got a couple of origin traits for this one, so Stunning Recovery, Vanguard's Vindication, and my absolute favourite, Wild Card. That is where final blows of the weapon have a chance to create experimental submunitions at the target's location. In the power slot, I'm using another stasis weapon, Fire and Forget. This one is a linear fusion rifle, and this build is very much focused around precision damage. Though, as I say, you can use your own weapons of your choice, anything that really works for the activity that you're going into. Fire and Forget is a legendary power linear fusion rifle with an aggressive frame, meaning it fires a 3-round burst. And this one is an aggressive frame linear fusion rifle, and it's one of the only ones other than Storm Chaser, and that was released in the Duality Dungeon back in Season of the Haunted. There is another one as well, although the name is escaping me at the moment, but Fire and Forget, it's a real good go-to weapon for Guardians who like to build with stasis weapons. For my mods, I'm using Harmonic Siphon, Stasis Weapon Surge Dynamo, and also Radiant Light as well. So let's have a look at the gameplay loop. So the build is focused around the Ballidorse Wrathweavers and a couple of effects on our Warlock. So They double the damage with the shockwave effect on our super, and that's good burst damage against tougher enemies and bosses. It also grants an overshield to allies within range and gives a 15% damage buff to their stasis weapons. Therefore, if you can coordinate with your team to run stasis weapons all throughout the team, that is going to be really, really beneficial to the fire team. Stasis weapons are going to complement the build nicely, and I'm using the relatively new Wicked Implement Exotic Scout Rifle, and that's got Stasis Build benefits built in because of the exotic perks. You're going to slow enemies with your precision hits, and it is much easier to get those because this is a Scout Rifle. Tithing Harvest is great here because destroyed Stasis Crystals or Precision Final Blows while Creeping Attrition is active create a Stasis Shard that returns to you, and collecting Stasis Shards refills the magazine. Therefore, any aspects or fragments that help you create more Stasis Crystals are going to be really, really useful. For the mods, I'm using a Harmonic Siphon and Stasis Weapon Surge. They're going to be useful for generating orbs, plus increasing the damage output of the Stasis weapons. Dynamo is also really good for getting more super energy, and given our exotic armor is all about our super, we want to make sure we have our super as often as possible. Any mods for the armor or the seasonal mods for super regeneration are going to be really, really good, so keep an eye out there and modify the build to suit whatever mods are available at the time. Well, that is it for this build, and let me know in the comments what you think about the build and share any improvements that you may have. But that is it for this Ballidorse Wrathweavers Stasis Warlock build in Destiny 2, and as always, thank you so much for watching or for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you real soon.